About Iran's attack on Israel is now coming out. If you read the mainstream media, though, Iran didn't even leave a scratch on Israel with the launch of hundreds of drones, dozens of cruise missiles. You might see headlines like this. Take a look. 99% of Iran's aerial threat were shot down. But the truth is starting to come out despite a media blackout. You're not even allowed to enter into those areas to get photos or videos to share on social media. And the New York Times is now reporting that Israel is about to respond and launch an attack of its own against Iran within 48 hours. So a retaliation for a retaliation, I guess. Again, this is according to the New York Times. We want to bring in former U.S. Marine, former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter, who late last week said this attack was about to happen, and you were proven correct. It did happen. And do you think, Scott, that we're going to see, first of all, we'll get into the details about the attack in just a moment, but do you think we're going to see an Israeli response here with this war cabinet being convened? What do you think the next 48 hours is going to look like?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is domestic Israeli politics writ large. This has nothing to do with the security of Israel from a traditional standpoint. This has everything to do with the political survivability of Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister who oversaw, the greatest security failure in Israeli history on October 7th when Hamas attacked Israel, and now is presided over, what some people might even say is an even greater security failure, the inability of Israel to prevent Iran from reaching out and touching with ballistic missiles a strategic defense sites that were protected by the best ballistic missile defense that Israel and American money could buy. So there's some posturing taking place right now. I bring up as much as I can the following reality. No American president in modern era has won election by turning his back on Israel. And no Israeli prime minister has stayed in office by turning his back on the United States. And right now you have a situation where Joe Biden, because of the outlandish behavior of Israel, is starting to turn his back. He made it clear that America would not stand side by side with Israel if it attacked Iran. And we have a prime minister in Israel that's telling the president of the United States, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you do. We're going to behave this way anyways. The motivations of both men are inherently political. Joe Biden is running for re-election, and he can't have another war. He can't have a war with Iran that would create an energy security crisis. Again, I remind your audience that under Biden's leadership, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve of the United States is down to less than 17 days. That's a little over 2 weeks, ladies and gentlemen, of economic viability should Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz and start launching attacks against critical oil-producing infrastructure in the region, which would be a byproduct of any American participation in an Israeli strike. Israel can't launch and sustain a viable military action against Iran without American assistance. So what's happening right now is the Israelis are saying to America, we're going to start this war anyways, and we just assume that you're going to come alongside us because you'll have no choice. And that puts Biden in an even further, political quandary. I would like to believe that a lot of this is debate for political consumption. The fact that we're reading about this in the New York Times and the Israeli press means that there's people who want us to be reading about this. And I think that's important because it shows posturing. So Benjamin Netanyahu and the cabinet can say, we wanted to strike, but we were held back by the United States, and shift the political responsibility to the United States. I still don't believe that Israel would launch and can launch an attack against Iran because the consequences of such would be dire. Iran proved, and again, I know we'll talk about this later, that it can strike anywhere in Israel anytime it wants. And they've said that if Israel attacks, they'll respond 1,000-fold, and they have the capacity to do so. So we'll see. These are desperate times. And when you start throwing in, narcissistic-driven personal politics, which is what this is about, Benjamin Netanyahu holding on to power, even though his continuation as prime minister is bad for the Israeli state, he does it for his own personal preservation, given the fact that as soon as he resigns or leaves office, he'll be indicted on corruption charges and probably spend the rest of his life in jail. Joe Biden is recognizing that his sinking political prospects in November could go completely underwater if there's a larger war with Iran that destroys the American economy. So, we have both men doing things that are driven not by the collective good of their respective populations, but by their own personal desire for political viability. And if you couch it in those terms, if their priority is, sustained political viability, it's very difficult to predict the future.
One thing, though, is predictable, and it always seems to come to fruition, is what the United States Congress does, which is funnel tens of billions of additional revenue over to Israel. And an emergency meeting this weekend of Congress, you hear Republican leader Mike Johnson, of course, pushing for additional aid to Israel. They're trying to decouple it right now from Ukraine. He'll lose his speakership if he funnels any more money to Ukraine. So it seems like Congress has an appetite to send more money and weapons and support to Israel. It'll just see, I guess, what happens in the next 48 hours on Congress. We're kind of watching that closely. But you did bring up the attack this weekend and what some of those missiles managed to hit major targets inside of Israel. And as I mentioned off the top here, the headlines, the mainstream media headlines are 99%, we got it, no worries at all. Didn't even leave a scratch. In fact, I even heard those same terms from Israelis saying not even a scratch, not even a scratch. But now we're learning that there was more than just a scratch. Can you walk us through, you've been tweeting about this, and some of the specifics about how this was actually a devastating attack on certain targets in Israel?
Well, I want to put a modifier on the term devastating. To me, a devastating attack means that a facility has been completely wiped out, made non-operational, permanently so. We don't know. There's three primary strategic targets, and there were several secondary strategic targets, meaning targets related to Israeli ballistic missile defense that were struck by the Iranians. One target, which is an Israeli intelligence facility in the Golan Heights, nobody's talking about, and it appears that may have been where the Iranians may have made an exception to their "we just want to touch you" rule and actually have done serious damage to this site. This is an intelligence facility that Israel uses to reach out and collect information in Syria, taking advantage of the dominant heights, etc. And it was involved in the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate. So the Iranians said, we're taking this out. And there's a blackout of information. Israeli media is not allowed to mention this, discuss this, etc. So the implication is something very bad happened there, but that's pure speculation. There were two air bases, and I'll just talk about the one air base. It's a base that the United States has deployed an X-band radar, the ANTPY-2 radar. This is the most powerful over-the-horizon radar in the world today. It gives the United States and indirectly Israel the ability to monitor over the horizon Iranian ballistic missile launches. The radar is specifically designed to collect Iranian ballistic missile launches. And it has been in place in Israel at the Nevatim Air Base for over a decade now. It is linked up with the American ballistic missile defense system, meaning that there's connectivity to Colorado, where the headquarters is, and connectivity to American satellites, surveillance satellites. The totality of the American anti-ballistic missile world is linked up to this, meaning that Israel has become an extension of America's ballistic missile defense. It's also linked to the joint U.S.-Israeli anti-missile systems that have been put in place, the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, the David Sling capabilities, plus a THAAD missile battery, an American missile battery that has been deployed and integrated, and advanced Patriot systems. Nevatim is the most heavily defended space on Earth, when it comes to anti-ballistic missiles.
Well, the truth about Iran's attack on Israel is now coming out. If you read the mainstream